The UAE could be removed from the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen after it deployed forces to a Yemeni island without consulting the exiled government. That's according to a senior Yemeni official speaking to the Associated Press. There have been further protests on Socotra Island against the UAE's military presence there. It's not clear when the troops may leave. Saudi Arabia sent a delegation to the island after Emirati soldiers took over key locations there this week. The Yemeni government and the UAE are formally allies against Houthi rebels, but the UAE has promoted other separatists in southern Yemen at the expense of the government. Well, let's look a little more deeply into this. We'll speak to Andreas Krieg now. He's the Assistant Professor of Defence Studies at King's College London, joining me live from Istanbul. Good to have you on the programme, sir. In terms of the sort of rather complicated politics of the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen, does the Yemeni government really have much of a leg to stand on in this dispute?
No, it's quite a remarkable development, actually. And if we consider the strategy that the United Arab Emirates have driven in Yemen over the past 3 years, actually, we see that there is a pattern evolving which doesn't necessarily directly concern fighting the Houthis or reinstating the Hadi government, as it was said in 2015 when the coalition started. But it's more about securing Emirati interests in the south of Yemen, access to the Indian Ocean, access to the Bab Al Mandab, the occupation of Aden through proxy forces against actually forces from the Hadi government. And now more recently we've seen this occupation or almost annexation of Socotra Island again against the Hadi government. So the Hadi government seems to have taken one blow after the other, whereas the UAE have actually empowered and supported forces that are working against the Hadi government. And at the same time, the Saudis are somewhat stuck in the north of the country fighting against the Houthis. So it doesn't seem to be that the Hadi government has any ally left, not in Saudi Arabia, not in the Emirates, and they don't really have any leverage now, calling upon the international community to stop the Emiratis because they seem to disregard international law here.
Meanwhile, the Saudis have come in to sort of mediate. Are they likely to do anything at all to rein in the UAE?
Well, it's hard to believe that, because the Saudis have somewhat pressured the Emiratis to come on board on this very protracted conflict. The Emiratis have been involved, have taken casualties, and have actually provided some of the most effective fighting force on the ground against the Houthis in the past and against other kind of groups in the south of Yemen as well. So the Saudis very much relied on the Emiratis, and now the Emiratis want to have their price. So the island and access to the Indian Ocean, the sea line, as well as some of the lines of communication around the Bab Al Mandab, that is something the Emiratis want to control. If you now look at Socotra Island, that is like an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Indian Ocean, closer actually to Somalia than it is to Yemen, and it's somewhat a very important, very strategic point to control access to the Bab Al Mandab, and then from there all the way up to the Suez Canal. So if you understand where the Emiratis are coming from, they're trying to control large parts of the trade going east to west and vice versa, as well as helping Dubai Ports Authority, which is one of the biggest ports managers in the world, to get more access to a very vital market. And then understand where the Emiratis stand strategically. They've built up surrogates and proxies in Somalia. They've built up proxies along the Red Sea coast. They've built up proxies in south of Yemen. They've taken over Aden using the Southern Transitional Council. They've done all this to secure their own interest at the expense, if you will, at a Saudi interest, which is all about fighting Houthis. But I guess the Saudis will cut them some slack because they understand that they have to give something back.
I beg your pardon. In other words, also at the expense, presumably, of the end aim and object of this war, which is defeating the Houthis.
Absolutely. But I don't think that the Emiratis are now on this war against the Houthis. If you see how they strategically placed their military assets, the way they have invested into their surrogates all around the Horn of Africa, it doesn't suggest that fighting the Houthis is a major priority for the Emiratis, but securing their vital national interest that they concern to be maritime security in that area, maritime control. I think that is pretty much what's on the books for the Emiratis here, and the Saudis have very little leverage to basically pressure them to withdraw.
OK, Andreas Krieg, we'll leave it there. Assistant Professor of Defence Studies at King's College London, joining me from Istanbul. Many, many thanks for your time.